So, the deal is now done. Yuki Tsunoda is out of Red Bull Racing. Almost. Think of this as something akin to what Alex Albon experienced 5 years ago. Wow, it's been 5 years? Back then, Alex's first full year with Red Bull looked promising. Improved significantly, Horner said. But Red Bull could not ignore Sergio Perez, suddenly free after Racing Point's rebrand, both a race winner and with millions of sponsorship money. Albon had insisted that he had done everything possible to remain with the team through 2021, but Red Bull then chose facts over emotion. And I think the same thing has happened in this case with Tsunoda, but emotion hasn't quite left the room, as we will discover today. Because even though Tsunoda's lost the battle to remain next to Max for 2026, he has been thrown a very important lifeline. A lifeline which I, a Tsunoda sympathiser, will certainly look at and go, well, that's fair, I guess. He's become Red Bull's third driver under Mekies. Not a demotion to oblivion, but more like survival mode. It could matter deeply, though, going into next year's regulation cycle, and the entire market going absolutely bananas. He might actually stand to gain out of all of this. And also, you gotta admit, Isack Hadjar has made a pretty good argument in convincing the bods over at Red Bull Racing that he should be the one that's promoted. He has managed to actually blow apart my target of 30 points to remain in Formula 1 for another year. He's got 51 points to his name, and had he not had his puncture in Qatar, it would have been closer to 60. And also, Mekies understands Isack more completely, having been there from the very beginning of his Formula 1 career, as well as observing him within the Red Bull ecosphere while he was in Formula 2 last year. And then with Tsunoda, sure, he's gotten to know the likes of Yuki, the Frenchman, but he only got to see him right at the tail end of his tenure with Red Bull as a mainstay driver. So here are Mekies' words for your consideration, and then we'll break it down later. I have had the pleasure of working with him, Yuki, at both Red Bull teams. Through his 5 seasons so far in Formula 1, he has matured into a complete racer, good over a single lap on Saturday, and capable of exceptional starts and excellent racecraft on Sunday. Everyone in the sport would agree it is impossible not to like Yuki. His personality is infectious, and he has become a very special part of the Red Bull family. On behalf of everyone at Red Bull, I thank him for what he has contributed so far, and we know he will provide invaluable support to the 2026 projects moving forwards. 2026 will be a huge challenge for the team and for Red Bull 4 powertrains. These are exciting times, and I am looking forward to seeing what we can do together. And in Isaac's place at Racing Bulls will be the hotshot Arvid Lindblad. Certainly a shot in the arm for Red Bull's goodwill amongst the British fans, because it's been a long time since we've seen a British-backed Red Bull driver. Back in the days of David Coulthard, maybe the British audience might hate Red Bull a little bit less. This is Red Bull's answer to how they think things will work out next year, when no one really knows what will happen with the entire roster and hierarchy of Formula 1. With, of course, Max at the centre of their solar system. That is the structure. But what does it all say, really? Because I'm sure if you're a Yuki fan, you're clamouring for answers right now. And if you're an Isack stan, you're praying. You're hoping that Mekies is really ushering in a quieter, more technically driven Red Bull racing. One that is not too showy. One that doesn't rely on PR and emotions and drama being the centre of their particular solar system, and instead, it's more technically minded, an engineering-led environment. The kind of rejuvenation that we've seen over at Haas. Because at the end of 2023, we all thought Haas was a joke and shouldn't be in Formula 1. Now, we cling on to Io Komatsu really closely. And this whole Tsunoda, Hajar, Lawson situation is a bit of an interesting glimpse as to how this team is going to operate in the post-Horner era. You know, while they're recalibrating instead of just relying on pure emotion and drama and saying, well, you know, Yuki did the best he could, but, you know, there's not really much what we can do. We wish him well wherever he goes. And notice Mekies' wording. Complete racer, infectious personality, invaluable support. There is warmth in all of that, but there is no mention of him being a future world champion. That tells you everything. He's a loyal soldier, is Yuki, but he's not a cornerstone of the project. But his popularity and media charm cannot be ignored. It's a very important marketing asset. And what he has done instead, Mekies, is respectful. It's a lot more than what could have been said. But the team has equally decided that he is not the guy that you would build a title run around. And performance-wise, admittedly, sadly, it does speak for itself. The call-up turned to be absolutely disastrous. You know, with driver errors, strategy slips from the team, which thankfully they've been much more accountable about, and even Helmut Marko has apologised about it. And then, of course, there is the realisation up close that Max Verstappen's car in your hands is too much to handle. And it really doesn't help that in the classifications, he trails both Lawson and Hajar. He is the lowest scoring Red Bull driver, and that is something you cannot ignore also. It all paints a picture of Yuki being a decent Formula One driver. He certainly does not suck. But he's also been thrown in at the deep end with one of the sharpest cars on the grid, and he simply just couldn't come up with the answer. It was certainly clear that the Cosmos was spending too much attention in helping out Max Verstappen's championship case rather than helping out Yuki in just trying to survive into 2026. Having said that though, I think there might have been a fairly sizable case in keeping him, stability and continuity, what have you, the kind of things that Christian was talking about when he signed that second contract extension with Checo, which then completely dissolved. Because Mekies said that he provides solid feedback and he is a very likeable man in the face of a challenge, and also he has matured considerably. I still think to this day Daniel Ricciardo being a teammate was the best thing that happened to him. And also, a byproduct out of all of the stuff, the speculation and the derision from the media towards Tsunoda, has taken heaps of pressure away from Isack Hadjar. He's been able to do his own thing after a disastrous debut in Melbourne, and Liam Lawson's quiet recovery, people have mostly ignored the Kiwi, and look what he's doing right now. And I do think that maybe if Tsunoda had performed that little bit better and might have actually helped clinch the team getting second place in the Constructors, they might have actually kept Tsunoda, selling continuity as a virtue, but we didn't get that. Hajar outscoring him in the junior car, that pretty much ends the debate really. Potential beats loyalty. Yet Yuki had done enough to convince the higher-ups that loyalty had some wiggle room and space, especially with no Honda presence anymore. That is quite a big deal. But is this just Red Bull hedging, or is it actually good for Yuki? There is some genuine benefit for him. We could have seen a scenario where Yuki Tsunoda was ejected from the Red Bull program entirely, and with the very real possibility that he was not getting back into Formula One, that he really had to be still involved in the paddock to try and get an opportunity for 2027. Now, he has that opportunity, with Red Bull backing. He is also an absolutely important linchpin in their initial forays into the brand new regulation cycle. It's not like he's just going to be doing stuff for TikTok or anything like that. He is actually going to be doing a lot of work in the simulator. A fact, by the way, when I went to the Red Bull factory, the video is coming out fairly soon, is that it is a need-to-know only basis as to the exact location. As in, if you don't need to know where the simulator is, even if you work for Red Bull, then you've not got a clue, mate. And also, he'll be doing lots of TPC testing, I would imagine. And thankfully, what Mekies has said has meant that I not needed to get out the spanner, not having to rely on the foam. I trust Mekies' judgment on this completely. And again, it keeps him in the shop window, because drivers like Esteban Ocon and Alex Albon, they managed to rebuild careers from similar positions, get themselves back into Formula One after spending some time as testers. But still, it's not a guarantee that it's going to work. A lot will depend on what happens in the driver market next year. Perhaps a team in the midfield would want a known quantity who can provide good feedback, is someone that they can get on with, and has plenty of fans. And you know what? I actually feel like this scenario of him being the Red Bull third driver is actually maybe a little bit more hospitable and survivable than if he were just to simply go over to Honda and Aston Martin and become their reserve driver, because you feel like the reserve program and the driver program at Aston Martin is not quite fully baked yet. Sure, they've got a fairly dependable driver in Jack Crawford. That is a very good one. Felipe Drugovich certainly did his duties before now moving off to pastures new. But then at the same time, they are very much susceptible to probably a huge amount of money, because they have got someone in for Abu Dhabi FP1, and it's not Jack Crawford. No, it's Kean Shields. Yeah, let's just say that Jack Crawford and Kean Shields, they are not on the same level of skill. That's all I'll say. So maybe it might be best that Yuki remains with the team that he has actually developed most of his senior career with. So with all of that in mind, you could easily argue that Red Bull gets to have its cake and eat it. Because he's funny, he's cheeky, he can still be right there in case there is an emergency or they need to make an emergency change, and you can't hold that against Red Bull, because look what Mercedes has been doing this year with Valtteri Bottas, come on! His year as their reserve driver, he's curated an even heavier media presence before he jumps over to Cadillac next year. Yuki could become a similar hybrid, part development tool and part mascot. And also, I think Red Bull's brand needs Yuki more than ever, because the team's global image in the midst of Max Verstappen has really become some kind of robotic-like dominance or something like that. Because everyone's just looking at Max and going, oh my god, is he even human? He is so untouchable. He's just out there. And it just makes me think that Red Bull might want to pivot against all of that, because yes, Max is one of the GOATs of Formula One, but but he's also actually quite human. He is actually someone with a good sense of humour. And Yuki is just the same. So maybe next year we might get to see more of Verstappen and Tsunoda and Lawson and Hajar just being people. Authenticity. Because you got to admit, that's what I think many people are crying out for. Just a little bit of realism every now and again, instead of just seeing these drivers as just drivers, machines, robots. You want to see their funny side almost, and Yuki could be at the centre of that particular campaign. So yes, I would argue Red Bull is having its cake and eating it, because they get to keep Yuki and his fandom, and also not have a wasted race seat, as many Tsunoda detractors would be saying. It means the door is open for Hajar to step up and see what happens. Because I think Red Bull really needs to try and fix this second seat curse. Tsunoda has not been the cure. He has certainly helped out in his own way, but it's become very clear that that seat is a raw speed filter. It's become a political headache. And, oh yes, a marketing tool. And, sadly, still a poisoned chalice. Although, admittedly, Mekies has done his best to try and, slow down the effects of said poison. They want to see who cracks next to Max, because that kind of chaos reveals which personality types survive inside their performance cult. Every single collapse they've had in the last several years since Daniel Ricciardo left them has been some kind of data point. So it makes me think that Hajar isn't replacing Yuki outright, but more like he's the next test subject in Red Bull's ongoing psych evaluation. Could he end up being the best fit? We'll just have to wait and see. Because look at how Mekies talks about him in the statement, saying that he has great maturity and that he has raw speed that is the #1 requirement in the sport, followed by produce the magic on track. Qualities which Red Bull value the most for that seat, the one next to Verstappen, because that's exactly what Red Bull has been lacking the last couple of years as the technical limitations of the car, the narrow operating window, became really apparent. What they need right now is somebody that doesn't have to be right on Max Verstappen's level, but somewhat close enough, and also, most importantly, be there to pick up the pieces in case Max has a bad day. Maintaining third place in the team standings is a fairly decent result, but that was off the fact that Ferrari had been absolutely dreadful this year. This was a saving grace in Milton Keynes' team's part. Therefore, you could easily argue that Red Bull's chasing volatility instead of stability and continuity, something that Horner had been parroting about the last few years or so in justifying Perez's continued existence when he completely fell off with the car. That maybe next year's car will be different, and that maybe it might actually unlock some more pace from Hajar in his second season. But we gotta remember Perez's parting shot to Horner, which came to light recently. He said to Christian, "I'm sorry for anyone who comes here, it'll cost them a lot." He's talking about the mental grind of living beside the likes of Verstappen in a car shaped entirely around him. This is the backdrop for the entire move. You either put a hardened veteran in that job like Checo, who will eventually resent the bias and attention toward Max, sort of something that happened with Daniel Ricciardo as well if you think about it, or you put in a kid who has never known another F1 environment and will have to bend himself backwards to try and fit it, and maybe just wait out the clock. In this case, Red Bull chose the kid. And said kid's own statement is telling as well, leaning heavily on gratitude, on how Red Bull kept believing and pushing, and that to work with the best and learn from Max is something I can't wait for. It's a very deferential posture, very plucky, very, very enthusiastic, very, very compliant. It's a far more mindful stance than what Liam Lawson took, and look what happened to him within 2 races. It did not work out for the Kiwi at all. And I think Isack is very much aware of that, because he was right there, and then seeing his brand new teammate completely go through the doldrums, but then eventually rediscover himself. It'll also help out Red Bull in this time of change of theirs, that Hajar is painting himself out to be some kind of apprentice to Verstappen, not some kind of challenger. He just wants to help out the team, so that means they don't nearly get as crabby with him. So that is politically ideal for the team, especially since they want to eschew themselves of having politics as the major drive of any change. Could there have been a case in maybe not promoting Hajar next year? Well, many people are still calling the fact that Hajar's been promoted as actually a demotion, that maybe he signed himself up for failure, that perhaps maybe they should have just kept the same lineup for both teams into next year and then just see what happens in 2027. That's what I would have personally done, but I don't work for Red Bull. And you also have to remember what Mekies said, saying raw speed is the #1 quality that the sport needs, and quite frankly, Hajar has been able to prove he does have the raw speed, especially in the last few races where he has actually been going toe-to-toe with the elite drivers in the V-carb. Just imagine what he can do with an RB22, which thankfully will be a little bit more forgiving to whoever's in the second seat. And I am not ashamed to admit that I did not rate Isack at all. I didn't think he was going to suck, but I just didn't really know much about him. My first impressions of him in FP1 weren't exactly glowing, but then, after what happened in Melbourne, the world rallied around him and he rebounded immensely with a podium in his first season in a midfield team. That is something remarkable. That is something that you could easily argue was the biggest surprise of the season, even bigger than what Kimi Antonelli has been able to do in the Mercedes. You might also want to wonder if Max had a say on all of this. Well, I don't really know, but what I can probably guess is that Red Bull will not hire a driver that Max does not get along with. So the lineup, who's next to him, he doesn't care about that. He just wants somebody that's not going to get in his way, and he can then focus on the engineering and technical side, the actual driving, the racing of his own part. And then you're probably wondering, well, what's Liam Lawson's situation in all of this? Well, quite frankly, even though he's only 23 years old, you've got to realise that he is now the only adult in the room. I don't count Verstappen in this because he is more than just a simple human adult. He is basically a god at this point. His 2026 confirmation quote isn't dreamy or defiant, it's professional. It's very bland. The tone of a man who knows what he missed out on and what he's still got to prove. There's no childhood dream language here, no gushing about Max or Red Bull there. It sounds like a guy who knows he missed out on the big time, and he understands exactly why he didn't. Now he's determined not to sulk about it and just get on with the job. And many other interviews I've seen with Lawson is that he is fully accepted he's not likely going to be back up at the senior team. He's more thinking about his destiny happening somewhere else. So I think that's his main job for 2026. Not to try and get back into the senior team, although it would be nice if he did, in his mind. So I think his management will be very much scouting other teams as to whether or not they would like the services of Liam Lawson, which, you must admit, has actually been transformed this season thanks to that front suspension tweak that was afforded to him around Spielberg. Like how Norris's front suspension tweak at Canada saved his championship campaign. It completely rejuvenated how we see Liam. Yeah, there are many detractors of Lawson still, but you can easily say that right now, for a midfield team, he is a dependable defender, like I said earlier. Somebody that you can easily call upon to qualify fairly well, make up some places, and in some cases take one for the team and hold everybody back. Be the next Alonso Express. Oh, shoot, we got to come up with a name for him. Liam Lawson, yes. And also from Liam's point of view, it's sort of a win and a bit of limbo. The win is that he's now the team leader at VCarb, so he definitely gets an opportunity in a big rules reset and with the car and platform, which has proven to be actually quite good. But the limbo side of things is that he's already had, then lost, the big seat. This is a Gasly-like predicament. And the organisation has now promoted another kid over him too. And then from Red Bull's point of view, keeping him at VCarb is very, very useful. He can be the reference for Lindblad. So in a way, you could easily say that Lawson is there as the reminder for Isack and Arvid, the youngsters of the Red Bull group, that Lawson will be coming for him and make the most of the fact if they do slip up. Hadjar could easily face demotion himself, and then Lawson might get the call-up to fill in the breach for the rest of the season. And that might be his opportunity, but quite frankly, I think it is a very unlikely one. We have never seen anyone at Red Bull Racing get a second bite of the apple, having already taken a first bite, and then completely, thrown it up. And I don't think Liam will be bitter about this, because for the longest time, people thought he was just simply dead meat. Well, how wrong were they? And then we got to get to Arvid Lindblad, because he is very much the wild card in all of this. 18, 6th in F2 this year. He is very much the unknown going into 2026. Is he going to be Red Bull's Kimi Antonelli? Well, about that. Fast, raw, occasionally rash, gets into trouble with the stewards. His promotion is all Red Bull, trusting the data first and foremost. Red Bull themselves have admitted that his F2 season was difficult in terms of where Lindblad wound up, yet they still talk about raw speed, maturity and potential. His own quote is classic Wunderkind energy, thanking everyone, calling it a proud moment, saying that next year will be a big challenge that he's ready to rise to. But if you line up his CV against Kimi Antonelli's stack of junior titles in prestigious junior events, you look at some of the penalties as well that Lindblad has accrued, he looks more like the weaker pick. Antonelli has simply won more in the junior system. But the thing about Red Bull, as has now been made very clear, They don't care about the results per se. They just care about the fact that Arvid can be in Formula One, he's got his super license, they've seen the telemetry up close and personal, they are going to trust that over what kind of silverware he gets in Formula 2. Is that an indirect dig toward that series? I mean, maybe. But it's also maybe their gamble in terms of the post-Verstappen era, somebody young in which to rely upon and call upon and then train up. Because just look what they did with Max, promoting him into Toro Rosso at 17. He then gets called up to the senior team at 18, wins his first Grand Prix with them, and it's so effective that the FIA changed their rules to ban anyone under the age of 18, and that's only recently been lifted after 10 years. So what all of this tells you is that Marco just looks at the data and says, ah yes, that kid's going to be very good, promote him right now. And yeah, the rest is history. And is this bet risky? Oh, you bet your sweet dippy it is. An 18-year-old going into a new regulation cycle with a rookie-heavy technical environment, he is going to have messy weekends, make no doubts about it. If his F2 year was already spiky, that tendency will not vanish in Formula 1. There will be questions regarding his racecraft, but what makes this potentially survivable is the nature of racing bulls now, and Lawson being beside him as some sort of stabilizer. Because you gotta admit, VCarb started off with a terrible and very stupid name, but the team culture there is really refreshing, something which Mekies and Alan Permain have manifested into something which is sort of the envy of any junior academy. Racing bulls is actually a benevolent force, very forgiving, very nurturing, and hopefully that might then transfer a little bit into the senior team. It won't be nearly as much of a culture shock as it had been the last couple of years or so. So maybe this might buy them some time to give Lindblad room to grow, that all of this change that we are seeing will mean that it won't be nearly as cutthroat going forward from this day on, that Tsunoda might have been the end of that era of Red Bull racing. But that is depending on whether or not the F2 candidates suddenly rise up and outperform Lindblad in their rookie years in that series. Because Nicholas Solov and maybe even indirectly Alex Dunn are two drivers they need to take seriously. Because the Bulgarian is extra pressure. He is racing with Campos next year with Red Bull backing, and he's already had a couple of races in F2 right now, and has already bagged a top 10. He's not going to be at the bottom of the roster. He will be Red Bull's intended F2 title challenger next year, make no doubts about it. But then you've also got to consider Alex Dunn in all of this. Will he wind up in the Red Bull fold eventually? Because even though Marco has cooled down speculation about it, he has praised the Irishman for having qualities that his junior team rates highly. So yeah, watch this space, folks. This is going to be very, very interesting. And when you couple it with the recent appointments at the McLaren Driver Development Program, it's a real can of drama. Maybe I'll make a video about that in the off-season, because this entire narrative of what's happening at Red Bull and McLaren, oh, it intrigues me immensely. But yeah, Solov. Yeah, his campaign is going to be very, very important, because if it turns out that he is going to be a title challenger next year at the same caliber as Hajar, that is going to throw a real big question mark over their lineup Red Bull and Racing Bulls for 2027. And what Mekies has proven is that even though he is more emotionally attuned than the likes of Horner, Red Bull is suddenly not going to be completely changing their outlook on things overnight. There is certainly an element of data being the first and foremost thing they think about. There are going to be many opportunities for Solov to do more racing, maybe some FP1 sessions. They're going to look at that data and decide whether or not it's worth keeping Arvid. Do they finally drop Lawson and then maybe push him off to another team with their own assistance perhaps, or maybe into a completely different sport? Or could Hajar be at risk? Who knows? And then if Alex Dunn gets signed up, that'll be even more pressure. Two elite Formula 2 drivers, one in their rookie year, one in their sophomore year. Oh, that is going to be really, really nerve-wracking for Lindblad, especially if they end up being higher than 6th in the championship. But what might give Arvid a little bit of a lifeline here is that VCarb right now wants to have a seasoned driver, not a veteran, but somebody who's got at least a couple of years of experience next to a complete and utter greenhorn, which in this case is Arvid. So if you do strip away all of the PR bump that we see from Red Bull, it's quite clear what Red Bull's roster is going to be. Verstappen is still the center of their universe and everyone orbits around him. They've chosen volatility over stability and continuity, which is a little bit different. And again, it really does help that Arvid is British. And throughout all of it all, Yuki Tsunoda will still be part of the show, albeit a little bit more in the background. But he'll be there, waving, smiling for the cameras, maybe in IndyCar eventually with a Red Bull sticker on his car. Who knows? But what I do know is that you will most likely move over to this video right here because this is still part of the show. So I'll see you over there.